Hi, my name is Leah Day, and welcome to this video for the Building Blocks Quilt Along. Today we're stitching our last design in a basket block. We're going to be working on pebbling and echoes, a combination that's really going to set this block off and really look wonderful. So let's get started. Here's our quilting design for this block, and just in case you're looking for this graph so you can mark your block too, you can find it in the Building Blocks quilt pattern available at leahday.com. Okay, for this block I have decided to not mark the pebbling. I'm going to stitch that freehand, but I did mark all of the echoes and I did mark this ring of circles that go inside the basket handle. Now notice how big this pebbling is. If you decide to stitch this freehand, really make sure that you're stitching pretty big circles. But let me get on the machine and show you one more thing that I'm doing to change up my pebbling just a little bit from what we've learned previously. So here's the block on the machine, and you can see I've already stitched through here with quite a bit of pebbling. And one thing that I'm changing up this time around is I'm going into all those nooks and crannies between the big circles, and I'm filling in those areas with little circles too. Let me zoom in and you can see this a little bit better. You can see all that I've kind of snuck in there and stitched little circles. I've also intentionally built up my thread just a little bit by stitching around the circles a second time. So this extra thread play is really going to make this basket stand out. So let's learn how to stitch this style of pebbling. I'm going to stitch out. I'm kind of in a little odd area, so I'm going to make kind of a half circle shapes about maybe a half of an inch around, something like that. And then I'm just simply travel stitching back around to build up that thread, and then I sneak in there and stitch just a tiny little pebble and build it up a little bit too. You can see I'm intentionally travel stitching. I'm intentionally building up my thread and making this a lot more dense than I have before. I like that look. I think it's going to really make the basket stand out nicely. So now I'm going to swing out with a really big pebble. I want this to start filling in a lot more space. I also don't want to lock up this texture too much. I don't want it to be too dense. So now I'm going to sneak in here and stitch a little circle into that spot. And as I stitch that circle, I just build up some more thread on the circle before, the pebble before. Sneak in here and stitch a little circle in there. Whenever I see just a single line of stitching, at least for this form of pebbling I'm doing right now, all I do is just work my way to it, travel stitch to it, and travel stitch along it to build up that thread. And I just kind of get into a pattern of swinging twice around every circle. So I form the circle, and then I swing around it again, just like that. You need to understand that this is it's the same design, it's pebbling. I'm just stitching a slightly different style of it. This is just ever so slightly more dense and intense because of the extra thread play, because of the extra attention to filling in all of those little crooks and crannies with little circles, and also that intention to build up thread along the edges of the circles by tracing along them, by traveling along them several times. What I like about this style is that it really allows you to hide mistakes. Like right there, I kind of travel stitched off a little bit, and that's no big deal. All I have to do is go in there and build up some thread, and it hides it. Right here, I had an area where I kind of stitched out of the ditch a little bit, and I can even hide that. Let's say, for example, I was stitching along in the ditch, and I came out. I mean, that's exaggerated. But if you came out on the right way of the pebbling, you could just simply turn that into a pebble, and then stitch properly in the ditch, and no one would be the wiser. So that's another tip too. A lot of times I'll use that to my advantage. If I stitch out of the ditch on the side of, that I'm going to stitch some pebbling, I just turn that stitch off into a very, very tiny pebble. Or the side of a pebble, I should say. And that works. Sometimes visualizing your circle, how you're going to fit it in, might be a little struggle. Like right here I have this weird tip of the triangle shape, and I'm trying to figure out how to fill it in the most logical way. kind of like something like that. I am trying to keep this, you know, like pebbling, I'm trying to keep these layers stacked right on top of one another. This is different from underwater rocks in the sense that we're not getting really messy and overlappy. Notice that I'm still very carefully stitching. I'm taking my time with this. I do have an area of bulky seam allowance right here, so I'm being kind of careful to kind of bounce back and forth without getting too stuck in one place. Those seam allowances can really get bulky right there. Okay, so I am satisfied with that. That looks really good, and you can see that density, intensity that comes from just filling in, just working your way in and filling in all those little nooks and crannies with more pebbling. Okay, so now I'm going to travel stitch over and around so I can start knocking out some of my echoes. And this is something you're going to have to shift around and really rotate your block around a bit for this, because your echoes, as you come up and around, I'm going to kind of hit the edge of my block, and that's where I'm going to stop and rotate, because this is such a big curve. I'm not going to be able to fit this within the within the space that my hands can make, within the kind of the frame created by my hands. So I really need to kind of find places that I can stop and reposition without it being noticeable within the curve. So that I had to stop and reposition, just kind of hold on to the fabric a little bit better. And I'm seeing it's just a little puddly right here, so I just smooth it out with my hands. This is why I wear gloves. I can get a better grip on it and just very gently smooth it out, and then I can stitch through that area, and then it's secure. Okay, so these rings are knocked out. Let's go inside here and knock out our handle. As you've seen a lot of echoes, and that's mostly a review, these circles stacked together in this handle might be a little trickier. So I'm going to swing around, and I have marked these, so I'm just stitching on the marked line. I'm going to travel stitch back up again and swing out. Really am maintaining a lot of control, a good grip on the block with my hands, but even still I kind of stitched off. And you know, I think I'm just going to build up the thread a little bit more than what I have previously in this handle. I stitched out, and I'm hiding it by adding a lot more thread to these circles, and I think that's a good way to do it. So for every circle I'm going to spin around, and then I'm going to go back around it again. Not only is it going to hide some minor mistakes, it's also going to give you a lot of practice if you stitch it this way. Even though the lines on the circles in this area are marked, I'm finding it tricky to stay on those lines simply because of the placement of the handle. There's a lot of bulk underneath my foot, my presser foot. So I went around that 3 times just simply to hide where I stitched off a little bit. And do keep in mind, you don't have to fill this handle with circles if you don't want to. If this looks challenging and you don't want to stitch it this way, you don't have to. You can most definitely leave that space open and empty. We have 2 blocks that didn't have anything designed in the handle, and that is perfectly fine. You don't have to stitch in this area. Okay, at this point I'm going to finish up my circles stitching down. I'm going to fill in these back and forth echoes, and then I will work my way. I'll probably finish up these echoes and work my way out and hit these rings in the outer edges of the block. So I'm going to flow through this and speed up the video so you can see how it works. So that's it for stitching pebbles and echoes within our last basket block. I really hope that you enjoyed seeing this different version of pebbling where we built up texture with thread, we added itsy bitsy tiny pebbles into all the nooks and crannies and made the texture a lot more intense and stand out more. But at the same time, remember that you always have that other option open to you. You have regular pebbling open to you. You have underwater rocks. All of these different designs can be used interchangeably. So I really hope that if one doesn't work for you, you can definitely try the others. So my name is Leah Day, and this has been a video for the Building Blocks Quilt Along. Pick up your copy of the Building Blocks quilt pattern and join us as we learn how to piece and free motion quilt 42 beautiful blocks together. Pick up your pattern at leahday.com. Until next time, let's go quilt.